No, it's not transit, man. It's me, man. Welcome to all of you people tuning in from all over the world. Alle grappies op 'n stokkie. At Waypoint, we're super excited about the next generation. We love kids. We love your kids. More than you love your kids. Not really, but we love them a lot. And with the restrictions being put in place, it means we can't come together. We can't create those irresistible environments that your kids love to attend and where we build a faith foundation of their own. So, to help you, we've put all our resources together on the website. You'll be able to access the videos through there. That'll give you the teaching information that you need to engage with your children. We will put out the discussion questions. It creates an ideal opportunity for you as a family to come together, pull together, and talk through what you've experienced as a parent and sowing into your kids' lives. And we as Waypoint, we'd love to partner with you in this season. We also then want to create an opportunity for us as parents to connect with each other, share ideas on what to do and how to make this more fun, more interactive with our kids, and just take this conversation a bit broader. So make sure that you're connected to our website, that you get the information that you need there. If you've got any other questions, contact either me or Alta, and we'll be ready to assist you with that. Looking forward to connecting with you and your kids.
Hi guys, and welcome to our online experience. It's Sunday morning and we are so excited you decided to tune in this morning. We are in week 2 of the national lockdown and it's getting a little difficult now. If you're anything like me, it's you're starting to feel the walls close in, you're starting to feel the isolation maybe a bit. But we want to encourage you. In this time, we've had to start looking creatively at how we connect with people, how we reach out to people, or maybe how we ask for help. This is something that we've been challenged with, and we've created a space for you guys to connect with us online, for you guys to ask for help or to offer help to any of those in need online. And if you want to know anything more, go to our website. It's waypoint.org.za. That's waypoint.org.za. You'll find anything you need there. And also, if you have family and you guys are starting to feel you need some stuff to do, we've got some amazing family content on there as well for you and your kids of all ages, to connect with one another, to have fun with one another, but also to grow and to learn together. So, right now, we are a week away from Easter. And this is a big deal for us. Easter is the big celebration. Easter is what we've been building up with this past series called Bystander. We're in week 6 of Bystander and we're building up to Easter, which is a big deal for us. And if you don't have any plans or your plans maybe have changed, we want to invite you to spend Easter with us next week. Same time, same place. We have an amazing day planned, an amazing hour. So we want to ask you to consider joining it with us. And if you haven't done Easter before, it's a new thing to you, especially welcome to you, and we would like you to connect with us. This is a message that you should not miss. So next week, Sunday, Easter, we'll be here, same time, same place. So we're going to go over to some songs in just a while, and then we're going into week 6 of Bystander, which is an amazing story, a story that maybe a lot of you know. But in Bystander, we've been looking at the story of Jesus through several signs. That pointed to not just miracles that he did, but it was signs to pointing who he really was. And we're looking at this through the eyes of one of his closest friends and disciples, John, who took the time to write all this down. So week 6 will be after that, and then I will be back to dismiss us into the rest of your Sunday. So we're going to sing a few songs with John and Johnny and the band. The first song, I love the way the first song starts. It starts off by saying, there is healing in the power of the Lord Most High. There is courage in the shadow of his wings. Now this comes straight from the book of Psalms. And this was just an amazing picture that the psalmist used to see that we can find, even in a time like this that we are experiencing now, we can find courage. We don't, not just to survive, but actually build up courage and build up healing and freedom and all these great stuff that sustain us. We can find it in the shadow of God's wings. We can find rest with him. So I love the song. So please join us as we start with Abundantly More.
is healing in the power of the Lord Most High. There is courage in the shadow of His wings. There is peace unending over all my life. There is freedom that washes over me. And I find all I need here in your presence, Lord. And I open up my soul, and you fill me up with all I need here in your presence, Lord. Where blessings overflow, there's always abundantly more. Goodness of the Lord my God. There is treasure in the kindness of my King. There is comfort in knowing your unfailing love. My provider, you set my spirit free. And I find all I need here in your presence. Your love for me is better than I imagined. More than I could ask or seek, more than I could fathom. God, your love for me is better than I imagined. More than I could ask or seek, more than I could fathom. God, your love for me is better than I imagined. More than I could ask or seek, more than I could fathom. God, your love for me is better than I imagined. promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. 'Cause you are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are here, touching every heart. I worship you. I worship you. You are here, healing every heart. I worship you. I worship you. 'Cause you are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. 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 Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop, you never stop working. You never stop, you never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop, you never stop working.
You never stop, you never stop working.
Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop, you never stop working. You never stop, you never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop, you never stop working. You never stop, you never stop working. 'Cause you are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. 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 That is who you are.
That is who you are.
That is who you are. 'Cause you are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are.
I love you, Lord, for your mercy never fails me. In all my days, I've been held in your hands. From the moment that I wake up until I lay my And all my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. I love your voice. You have led me through the fire in darkest nights. You are close like no other. I've known you as a father. I've known you as a friend. I have lived in the goodness of God. And all my life you have been faithful. And all my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God.
Your goodness is running after me. Your goodness is running after me. With my life laid down, I've surrendered now. I'll give you everything. Your goodness is running after me. Your goodness is running after me. Oh, your goodness is running after me. With my life laid down, I'm surrendered now. I give you everything. Your goodness is running after me.
And all my life you have been faithful. And all my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. Oh, I will sing of the goodness of God.
Now, at some point in your life, and I'm assuming this is true of you, it is true of me, so this isn't a you thing, this is a we thing. At some point in all of our lives, even if you're not a Christian, this isn't even a Christian thing, this is just a thing. We have all wondered at some level, why would, if there is one, why would a good God, assuming there's a good God, why would a good God allow bad things to happen? I mean, this is a universal question. All religious people of all faith backgrounds at some point intersect with this question. In fact, for some of you, it may have been this question that spelled the end of faith for you. That your faith died a slow, painful death because of this question. Or perhaps you're watching or listening at one of our churches and your faith is currently dying a slow, painful death because you just can't get resolution around this question. Now, the interesting thing about this question, and I'm not going to resolve it today, there's not enough time and I'm not smart enough, but here's something that's interesting about this to me. This question always revolves around the pain and the suffering out there, or the evil in the world out there, and never the evil in the world in here. Or let me put it a different way. Have you ever done anything bad? Do not raise your hand, right? Have you ever done anything bad? I have. But here's the thing. I've never met anyone, you may be the first one, I've never met anyone who doubted the existence of a good God based on their own badness. In other words, I've never heard this. How could a good God allow me to happen? I've never heard anyone say that. Maybe you have. Or another way of putting it is this. If God were good, if God was good, he would have done something about me by now. Right? It's always this bad. And so when you see this, I know what you think. You think what I think, even though I put it up here. It's like, okay, no, Andy, I'm talking about the really, really bad stuff. I'm not talking about the bad I do. I mean, I'm not perfect. I'm not good. And if I factor in the evil intent, if I factor in the things I would like to do, if I thought I could get by with them and not get caught, not go to prison for the rest of my life, I mean, even factoring that in, I'm not talking about my evil, my potential for evil, or my bad. I'm talking about the really, really bad stuff out there. How could there be a good God when there's all that really, really bad stuff out there? Now, just to play with you a little bit, the problem is once you enter into that conversation, once we start talking about gradations of bad and evil or some sort of spectrum, now you're in the world of how much wood would a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood, and that's an endless question. In fact, it leads to somewhat of an unfalsifiable premise, which makes the whole idea meaningless. And I'm not being critical because we all wrestle with this, but eventually, if you wrestle with that question long enough, you end up here. I don't believe God exists because I exist. The only way a good God could prove to me, that he exists is to eliminate all evil and all potential evil, including me, but then I wouldn't be around for him to prove that he exists. And it's an unfalsifiable premise. It falls apart. But it's so emotional, and it's so emotionally challenging, especially if you're facing evil or you've been the victim of evil. And to the rescue comes John. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. John who wrote the fourth gospel. John, the friend of Jesus. John who tracked around with Jesus during Jesus' entire earthly ministry. And John, I think, if he were to hear this idea or this argument for, against the existence of God, I think John would stand up and say, wait, hang on, because I saw something that might help you. I saw God in a body coexist with evil men. And he didn't prove he was God, and he didn't prove he existed or that God existed by exterminating or by eliminating evil. He did something else. Instead of eliminating me, John would say, he loved me. Instead of eliminating me because of the evil in me, John would say, he went to work eliminating the evil in me because he loved me. So we're in part 6 of this series, Bystander, the subtitle being John and the Rabbi from Nazareth. And we've been tracking along with the gospel writer John as he tracked along with Jesus. And he organized his entire account, the Gospel of John, around these signs. He doesn't call them miracles, he calls them signs, because Jesus, quote, miracles weren't random acts of kindness, as we've said. They were specific things Jesus did to serve as signs that pointed to something, because that's what a sign does. And all of these signs pointed to Jesus to substantiate the fact that he was who he claimed he is. Because the ultimate question in life really is not, is there a good God and how does good and bad work together and how could a good God, that's not the ultimate question. The ultimate question is, who is Jesus? Because if Jesus is who Jesus claimed he was, then it resolves that dilemma for us, as we're going to see today. And John would say, I was an eyewitness. I was a bystander. And if you had seen what I saw, you may arrive at a different conclusion as it relates to not only who Jesus is, but this whole idea of, can a good God coexist in a world or with a world full of evil? Now, last week we left off, if you've been tracking along with us, Jesus, during his entire earthly ministry, went north to south and south to north. He would go to Galilee, back to Jerusalem and Judea, then back to Galilee, then Jerusalem and Judea. And last we left off, Jesus was in the southern part of what we would call modern-day Israel, around the city of Jerusalem. And today's account picks up with him actually at the temple one afternoon, and he is challenged once again by the religious leaders, the temple leaders, and here's how the conversation went. They said to Jesus, "How long? How long? How long will you keep us in suspense? I mean, come on, just say it. Are you the Messiah or not? Just tell us plainly." And Jesus answered, "Come on, guys, I did tell you, but you did not believe. The works I do in my Father's name testify about me." In other words, and this is the theme of John, and hopefully this is the big takeaway if you've been tracking along with us in this series. Jesus says, look, guys, I didn't just tell you. That would be easy to do. I've shown you. I've given you evidence. I've done sign after sign after sign pointing to the fact that I am, in fact, the Messiah. You just won't embrace it. And then in this same conversation, Jesus kind of goes off the rails a little bit, at least in their minds, and he claims that he and the Father, which is God, that he and the Father are one. Like he and the Father are the same. And when he does this, they just go into hysterics. Again, his opponents, right there on the Temple Mount, which this is just unbelievable that they would even consider this. They picked up stones to stone him, but Jesus says, wait a minute. I have shown you so many good works from the Father. For which of these are you stoning me? And they're like, there he goes again, trying to out-argue us. They're going, look, we're not trying to stone you for your good works. We're not stoning you for your good works, they replied, but for blasphemy, because you, a mere man, you claim to be God. And then Jesus leans in, he presses further, he says, no, I want you to look at the works I've done, because the works I've done are evidence. I'm not asking you to believe in me because I say believe in me. I'm not asking you to follow me just because of faith. I want you to open your eyes. I don't want you to be willfully blind. There is something to see, and once you see what there is to see, once you discover what can be discovered, you'll discover that I am who I claim to be. He's not asking us to follow because of faith either. In fact, this is why John gives us his account. He tells us at the end, we've seen it every single week. He says, look, the reason I've written these things is I want you to know what I saw, because if you will accept that I am giving a true testimony of things that truly happened, you'll arrive at the same conclusion I did about who Jesus is. Jesus continues, he says, even though you do not believe me, believe in the works, that you may know and understand that the Father is in me and I in the Father. In other words, he says, look, guys, I understand. I don't fit your description of Messiah. I don't fit the description of the one you are waiting for. But forget about me for a minute. Just consider what I've done. Consider what I've taught. Consider the signs. Consider the miracles. How do you explain them? And then Jesus goes all in. Then Jesus goes all out. What Jesus did next was he gave the entire community, no more isolated signs here and there, north and south, and secret, just a few people see it. Jesus goes all in, Jesus goes all out, and he performs a sign, or creates a sign, really manufactures a sign for the entire community that was such indisputable evidence that he was who he claimed to be, that it forced the hand of those who did not want to see. It forced the hand of the willfully blind. Here's what happened. Now, a man named Lazarus was sick, and he was from Bethany, which was a couple of miles away from Jerusalem, in the village of Mary and her sister Martha. So when he got sick and it looked like he was going to die, this was a serious sickness, the two sisters sent word to Jesus, and Jesus is about a day's walk away. They sent word to Jesus, Lord, the one you love is sick. So they sent a messenger, and the messenger says, I've come from Mary and Martha, and Mary and Martha want you to know that the one that you love is sick. They don't even have to, the messenger doesn't even have to say Lazarus' name, because he knows Jesus will know immediately that Mary and Martha are concerned about their brother. And when he heard this, Jesus says to his disciples who were with him there, when he's heard this, Jesus said, this sickness will not end in death. But the fact is, Lazarus had already died. He died while the messenger was on his way. And then Jesus says something that's so strange that he begins to create a brand new category for his disciples. He says this, no, it this sickness is for God's glory. Wait a minute. So, according to you, Jesus, or for us, according to Jesus, bad things don't disprove the existence of a good God? And John would say, exactly, but there's more, because Jesus finished with this. So that, in other words, here's a purpose statement. There's actually a purpose to all this. So that God's Son, talking about himself, may be glorified through it. That this sickness, this evil in nature, not just human nature, not just human behavior, this evil in nature, this evil was left unattended on purpose because it had a purpose. And in this moment, Jesus creates a new category for his disciples. And in this moment, for some of us, Jesus creates a new category as well. That sickness can be, as uncomfortable as it is even to say, that sickness can be for the glory of God. Now, John knows that when we hear that, when his future readers hear that, they're going to think, wait a minute, I'm not comfortable with that. So John races to the rescue as quick as he can to assure us. Now, you need to know, Jesus actually loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. That Jesus actually loved these people. And why does John tell us this? Because when you read this story, when you hear this account, you begin to think, wait a minute, he must not love them at all. He healed total strangers, and here's someone who he's been in their home. They have supported him financially probably. And now this person who he supposedly loves is dying, and Jesus doesn't race to the rescue? Is there something going on between Jesus and Lazarus? And John's like, no, you need to know. I know it's strange. I know there's so much tension in this story. Jesus actually knew these people, and Jesus actually loved them. But it doesn't look like it, does it? And let's just be honest, okay? Sometimes when it's us, it doesn't look like he loves us either, does it? I think this is why Jesus actually manufactured this sign. So he continues. So when Jesus heard that Lazarus was sick, he actually stayed where he was 2 more days because he was up to something. He was staging a sign with a purpose in mind. Here's what I don't want you to miss today. He was staging a sign with you in mind. He was staging a sign with this generation of Jesus followers in mind. And then he said to his disciples, okay, after those 2 days went by, it's time. They just forget about it. The messenger goes back. They settle in. They're doing whatever they're doing. 2 more days. Jesus suddenly out of the blue says, okay, let's all get up and go back to Judea. Which immediately the apostles get very concerned about that because Jesus is not all that popular in Judea. He keeps having these controversies and these arguments with the temple leaders there. They know that perhaps his life will be threatened eventually if it hadn't been already, and in some cases it had been because they'd picked up stones to stone Jesus, even though they probably wouldn't have followed through. And so his disciples respond, but Rabbi, they said, in case you've forgotten, and we know you're Jesus and everything, but in case you've forgotten, a short while ago the Jews there, where you want us to go, tried to stone you, and yet you want to go back? And their real issue probably isn't the safety of Jesus. Their real issue is their own safety, right? In fact, Jesus, if you want to go back, could you go back without us? Because that did not go well. That was a very threatening moment. Jesus, you may have noticed us stepping back in that moment because not everybody that's throwing a stone is all that accurate, and we love you and everything, but we don't want to be too close to you during a stoning. So if you don't mind, could we just stay here? And if you must go, can you go without us? And then in this very tense moment between Jesus and his closest followers, he does that Jesus thing that he does. In fact, it's these kinds of words that, for me, authenticate the fact that these events actually happened. These are the parts of the narrative that no one would make up, because it seems, once again, that Jesus totally changes the subject. And why does he do that? Because he's the master teacher. And it was in these moments his disciples would lean in. And when you're reading through the Gospels, it's in these moments that you almost lose the theme of the narrative, or track of the narrative, because it's like Jesus goes off script. So he said, hey, we're going back to Judea. They're not sure they want to go. They bring up the fact that last time he was there, his life was threatened. And Jesus answered and he said to them, are there not 12 hours of daylight? Do what? Yeah, aren't there not 12 hours of daylight? I mean, isn't it true that for about half the day you can see well, and for about half the day you can't see at all? And they're like, see, we're not even going to say anything because this is what he does, right? He continues, anyone, talking about them, and his immediate audience. Anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble, for they see by this world's light. Yeah? It is when a person walks at night that they stumble, for they have no light. And they're like, thank you. What are you talking about? And here's what he was saying. And we know this because of what happens, and we know this because of what he taught before. When Jesus talked about there being 12 hours, he's talking about a unique opportunity that his original audience had. He's saying, gentlemen, I'm going somewhere, and you would do well to follow me. Follow the light of the world while the light of the world is in the world. Follow the light of the world while the light of the world is in the world, and you will see things that you can't even begin to imagine. You will never see more clearly, he says to them, as long as you're following me, because I am the light of the world. But if you stay here and refuse to follow me out of fear, you'll miss out, and you'll regret what you miss out on later. If you stay here and refuse to follow me, and this is where his message begins to transcend the generations, and he begins to speak to you, he begins to speak to me. If you refuse to follow the light of the world while the light of the world is in the world, and if you refuse to follow the teachings of the light of the world when the light of the world leaves his teaching in the world, you will stumble around in darkness. You will do your best to make sense out of a life that does not make sense. You will do your best to mine purpose out of a life that has no purpose. Because apart from the author of life, you will eventually find yourself in a corner. You'll eventually find yourself backed into a corner of despair, where Richard Dawkins perfectly expresses, where there is at bottom no design and no purpose and no evil and no good and nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. Apart from the light of the world, apart from the presence of Jesus, God in a body, who came into this world, and this is the part we dare not miss, who came into this world to explain what God is like. In the law and the prophets, you had bits and pieces. You had hints of what God is like. In the new covenant, under the new covenant with Jesus, Jesus came into the world, and later, over their final Passover together, one of the disciples says, just show us the Father. And Jesus said, it's not going to get any clearer than me. I am the light of the world who has come into this world. Follow the light of the world while the light of the world is in the world, because when I leave, it will grow dark. He continues, after he said this to them about going to Judea, he went on to tell them, look, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, and I am going there to wake him up. Who's in? Who's going with me to wake him up? So then at this point, they decide to give Jesus medical advice, which is a little bit odd, but we do this all the time, right? We pray for the doctors. We pray for the surgery that it'll go well. We give God, God, if only you'll do this. And so they decide to give Jesus a little medical advice. I said, because they don't want to go. I mean, this is how we know the real issue isn't Jesus being stoned. They're worried about their own lives. They're looking for an excuse to stay where they are. So they say, Lord, you said he's asleep and you're going to wake him up, but if he's asleep, you probably shouldn't wake him up, because if he's asleep, he's probably getting better. The fever has broken. He's fine. Let's not wake him up, right? If he sleeps, he'll get better. Thank you, Andrew. Perhaps you're right. Let's just stay here and make s'mores, right? But Jesus said to them, John knows, because after the fact, he understands exactly what Jesus was saying. He continues, Jesus had been speaking of Lazarus' death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. So then he told them plainly, guys, Lazarus is dead. Lazarus is dead, to which they're as confused as we are. But wait a minute, you just told us that this sickness will not result in death. That's why we didn't rush to Bethany. And now somehow you mysteriously know that Lazarus is dead. And what comes next is terrible for Mary and Martha. And what comes next is terrible for Lazarus. But what comes next is fantastic news for you. In fact, what comes next, I think, is for you, and is for me, and it's for future generations of Jesus followers. He says this, Lazarus is dead, and for your sake, I am glad I was not there. For your sake, his 12, for your sake, for my sake, as we're going to see, for the sake of every parent who's ever buried a child, for the sake of every husband who's ever buried a wife, for the sake of every wife who buried a husband, for the sake of every friend who attended the funeral of a friend's child, for every boyfriend who ever lost a girlfriend to death, for everyone who has ever attended a funeral and it was too soon and it made no sense and it didn't line up with the idea that there's a good God who controls the universe. For everyone on the other side of the cross's sake, Jesus manufactures a sign for our sake. And they had no category for this, because this was indeed a brand new category. So that, purpose statement, Lazarus is dead, and for your sake I'm glad I was not there, so that you may believe, but let us go to him. They are so confused. He won't die, but he's dead. Let's not hurry, let's hurry. You may die. And so Thomas, this may be my favorite line of the whole narrative because it's so interesting. Then Thomas said, I love this. Then Thomas said, not to Jesus, but to the rest of the disciples, let us also go that we may die with him. I love this. Lazarus is dead. If Jesus goes, he'll be dead. Let's just all go and be dead together. This is going to end the same for all of us. Meanwhile, back in Bethany, the village of Mary and Martha, you know what they're thinking. They're thinking, where's Jesus? We sent a message to him days ago. He did not show up. Not only did he not show up, he missed the entire funeral. And the messenger came back and said that I delivered the message. He didn't seem all that urgent or all that concerned, so I came back only to find that my master has died. On his arrival, a day later, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. And when Martha, Mary's sister, when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him. And here's some of the most honest text in the whole New Testament. Here again, John wants us to know that Jesus didn't kind of bounce along the surface of human emotion. That this wasn't someone who just was always at 30,000 feet and never dipped down into human pain. John says, no, I was with him during this time. I want you to understand the gravity. I want you to understand that it was both purposeful and at the same time heartbreaking. And she said, Lord, if you had been here, this is our prayer, right? I mean, this is us. This is universal. This is all of us. This is if the only time you ever pray is when there's an emergency. This is you if the only time you've ever prayed is when you were about to lose a loved one. This is for those of you who, when you prayed, you weren't even sure who you were praying to. You knew that the medicine had failed, the doctors had failed, and if there's anybody out there, this is your opportunity to show up on my behalf or on behalf of someone I love. If you had been here, my brother would not have died. In other words, you were late, and you better have a good excuse, but there's no good excuse. God, if you're there, you could have, but since you didn't, you must not be there, or you must not care. And if you've ever had those thoughts, if you've ever had those emotions, I want to assure you, I want to give you some good news. There's nothing wrong with your faith. This was the heart cry. This was the expression of someone who knew Jesus personally and didn't feel like, get this, in the presence of Jesus, she had to be polite. She just brought it. If you'd been here, you could have kept this from happening. Something happened and there's no good excuse. You should have been here. The bad things happen to good people. Bad things happen to friends of Jesus people. But she's like us as well. She's trying to hang on to whatever shred of faith she has, every shred of hope she has. And she says, but I know that even now God will give you, Jesus, whatever you ask. And Jesus says to her, your brother, Lazarus, will rise again. And now Martha thinks, we're going to talk about theology, but theology is not very comforting to me right now, Jesus. So don't give me a sermon about the future, and don't give me this sermon about one day, someday. I'm not ready for that. We haven't even finished the funeral yet. And she says, I know my brother will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. I know, but that's not comforting. And then Jesus does something that if we were standing there, I think would take our breath away. In fact, every time I read it within the context of this story, this is so powerful to me. He says, Martha, look at me. I'm not here for a sermon. I'm not here for a theology lesson. I'm not even here to correct your theology. And I'm not asking you to trust in what you've always been taught. Look at me, Martha. I am the resurrection and the life. This isn't a category, it's a person. This isn't a promise out there somewhere. You are at the epicenter of resurrection and life. I am the embodiment of all your hopes and dreams as it relates to the people that you love most. Who would say that? Who would say that at a time like that? And John, who's a witness for all this, is going, I know. It was unbelievable, so much drama. And they imagine John and Peter and Andrew, they're like, what's going to happen? Well, once they found out Lazarus is dead, they didn't want to go. How embarrassing to show up late to the funeral of one of your best friends. You were only a day away and you'd been warned. That one, Jesus continues, the one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives, I know it's confusing, and whoever lives by believing in me will never die. And of course, our heads just spinning. Our heads are just spinning. Jesus is saying, look, just as Jesus said that Lazarus wouldn't die, but he died, in the same way you will, but you won't. Because according to Jesus, who claims to be the resurrection and the life, death is only a door. And it's why throughout the New Testament, when Christians talk about death, they always talk about sleep. But again, her head is spinning, her heart is broken, her emotions are on just red alert. She's not sure what to say. And then Jesus asks her and asks you and asks me kind of a crazy question. He says to her, do you believe this? She's like, believe this? I don't even understand this. I mean, Mary feels the same way we do. I mean, that's a lot to believe. Okay, you're late to the funeral. My brother is dead. My heart is broken. I can't be angry at you because I know you've been sent from God. I don't know how to sort this out. And so she says maybe what you and I say in moments like this. She says, yes, Lord. Yes, Lord, she replied, I believe all I understand, and I don't understand everything, but I know I don't have to understand to believe everything. I believe that. This is as far as I can go. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God who has come into the world. That's what I believe. I don't know about you die, then you're not dead, and once you're not dead, then you're alive again. I don't get all that, but I know this. I've come to believe, based on what I've heard and what I've seen, that you are the Son of God, and I'll just stay there and not try to sort the rest of this out. Martha tells Mary. Mary runs out, has a similar conversation with Jesus. And then Jesus finally shows up at the place of mourning. And here's what happens. Text continues. When Jesus saw her weeping, Mary and Martha, and that the Jews who had come along with her from Jerusalem also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. And so he asked, where have you laid him? Come and see, Lord, they replied. And when he arrives outside the tomb of Lazarus, the one he loves, he pauses. And I love this part of the story. In fact, for some of you, this is the part that should mean the most. In this moment, when Jesus knows what's about to happen, in this moment when Jesus in some ways has prearranged this sign for the entire community right outside of Jerusalem, he knows that when he does what he's about to do, word will get to Jerusalem quickly. In this moment, he pauses to enter into the emotion of the moment. So he expresses divine empathy. Peter was there. Peter would later write a couple of letters to the church. We call them 1st and 2nd Peter. And in one of those letters, Peter says this: when you're going through a difficult time, you have permission to cast all your cares on him because you know he cares for you. And I think if we were to say to Peter, Peter, how do we know he cares for us? Peter might have taken us back to this moment and said, you won't believe it. I stood there and I watched Jesus agonize and weep over the loss of a friend, and then he turned right around and brought the friend back to life. I'm just telling you, no matter what you believe and no matter what you're going through, you can cast your cares on him. It's not a theological category. I can tell you from personal experience, Peter would say, he cares for you. And that's why it's not a trivial detail. And it's why the people who chopped up the New Testament in chapters and verses gave these two words its own verse. And in the midst of all this pain and sorrow and confusion, Jesus enters into all of it. And John tells us, Jesus wept. There's a little Greek thing going on here. He didn't weep like the mourners who weep out loud. He wept in his heart. He wept silently. He wept to himself. Then the Jews who were there said, see how Jesus loved him? See how this man loved Lazarus? But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of a blind man have kept this man from dying again? These are our questions, right? Why didn't he do something about this? If he could have, he would have. Go to that screen. Yeah, if he could have, he would have. But since he didn't, obviously he can't. But as it turned out, he could have. But he didn't, on purpose, for your sake and for mine. In this moment, and I don't know how to say this any better than how I'm going to say it, but this is the big idea, I think, of this whole narrative, why Jesus arranged this. In this moment, we have eternity. We have all of eternity condensed to an afternoon. We have all of eternity condensed to a moment. We have all of eternity condensed to a single afternoon. In this one segment of this afternoon, we have the pain of life, the disappointment, the fear, the confusion, the unanswered prayer, the tears of God, and then finally, the reconciliation, the answer. I think Jesus, in this magnificent way, said to all the future generations, this is what eternity looks like. That when you weep and when you lose and when you cry and when you mourn and when you're afraid and when you're angry and when you have questions there are no answers to, you just need to know this has happened before. And in this snippet of life, in this piece of narrative around my friend Lazarus, I have given you hope because here is your whole life condensed to an afternoon. Jesus once more moved deeply, the text says, came to the tomb. And you remember this maybe from childhood if you grew up in church. And he said, take away the stone. And at this point, the mourners, they fall silent. And Mary and Martha gasp. But Lord, said Martha, so practical. Lord, said Martha, by this time there is a bad odor, for by the way, Jesus, he has been in there for 4 days. You're not just a little late, you are late. Late. And Jesus smiles and he says, did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. And Jesus looked up and he prays. This is amazing. Listen to this prayer. Let me tell you what the prayer says, and I'm going to read you the prayer. This is so powerful. Jesus basically says, God, you and I know what's going on. Me and the Father, we're one, but I just want everybody else to know that we're connected so that nobody gives me credit for what you're about to do. Father, he says, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this out loud for the benefit of the people standing here and for our benefit as well. Because at the end of the day, the ultimate question isn't what's true or what's false. The ultimate question is, who is Jesus? He said, I'm praying this so that no one makes any mistake that you and I are connected at the hip. We are, in fact, one. But I said this for the people who are standing here, that they may believe that you sent me. Then once he finished this prayer, the text says that he said in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out, come out. And the dead man came out. And we cannot imagine what happened at that moment with the crowd, with Peter and Andrew and John and the people who had followed Jesus, the people who had seen Jesus for the first time, the people that thought this is the hoax of all hoax, the people who couldn't imagine that he asked them to open the tomb. The dead man came out, his hands were still wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. And Jesus said to them, take off the grave clothes and let him go. And do you know why Jesus had to say this? Because nobody was rushing up to a mummy who came walking out of a tomb. They were all, in fact, don't you think they all took a step back? Jesus is probably the only one standing out front. Everybody takes a step back. They don't know what to believe. And Jesus kind of wakes them up out of their stupor and says, let them go. And then here's the statement John didn't even need to give us, but he did, because this is the point of his book. This is the point of his gospel. Therefore, this is kind of a duh moment. Therefore, many of the Jews who had come to visit Mary and had seen what Jesus did believed in him. I bet they did. It's interesting if you studied religion in college or if you took a New Testament class at a secular university. Here's something that skeptics agree on. Skeptics, people who don't believe Jesus was anybody special, cannot get around the fact that for there to have been as many Christians as there were by the 3rd century, that Christianity had to start off with a bang. That during the days of Jesus and toward the end of Jesus' ministry, there had to be many, 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 many people who claimed Jesus as Messiah for there to be as many people as there were 300 years later. that said Jesus was their Savior in the Roman Empire. And do you know why so many Judeans decided to embrace Jesus as Savior at the end? Because of faith? No, because of what they saw. Because here's the formula John wants us to leave his gospel with. Here's a formula that may be brand new to you regardless of how long you've been a Christian. And John's formula is simply this, that for that first century group, seeing was believing, which led to trusting. Seeing was believing that led to trusting. Seeing, Jesus said, look at the signs, look at the evidence. Seeing led to believing. I believe that Jesus is who he claims to be, that led to trusting. And what is trusting? It's placing one's personal faith in who Jesus is based on the evidence. Seeing led to believing, which ultimately led to trusting. This was indisputable evidence for the people in the community surrounding Jerusalem. In fact, it was such indisputable evidence that people went back to Jerusalem and began talking about this extraordinary thing that had happened in the open 2 miles away from Jerusalem. And Jesus' opponents, the people that were sick and tired of having to deal with this wannabe Messiah, this false rabbi, they had a meeting, and they decided in the meeting that Jesus must go and Lazarus must go as well. Why? Because he was too much evidence that Jesus might, in fact, be who he claimed to be. In the meeting, there was a spy who later told John what was said. And this is a statement made in the meeting where they decided to get rid of both Jesus and Lazarus. And John must have chuckled when he wrote this down. If we let him go on like this, talking about Jesus, everyone will believe in him. And then the Romans will come and take away both our temple and our nation. And as John dictates this part of the story as an old man, again, he must have laughed. If we let him go on, John looking back must have thought, if they let him go on, they had no idea who they were dealing with. They didn't let him do anything. He laid down his life on purpose, and then he took it up again. God, John would tell us, came and lived alongside evil, bad men. And the light was so bright that while it was attractive to some, to others it was repulsive. He said it this way, that light, talking about Jesus, has come into the world, but people love darkness instead of light because their deeds were evil. But God, John tells us, did not eliminate the evil. God, according to John, placed the evil on the shoulders of his Son. God placed the evil and all the bad in the world on the shoulders of his Son so that you would not have to perish, but that so you could have the life that Jesus promised. John would remind us, I was just a bystander, but what I saw caused me to believe that Jesus was who he claimed to be. And I hope through reading my account and hearing my account, you too might arrive at the same conclusion I arrived at. So eventually, he got his story out. But John, as we've said all along, had an agenda with his story. And his agenda was simply this, that you, that I, that we, that the world might believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing, we might have life in his name. And we don't simply believe in belief, and we don't simply believe in trust, and we don't simply trust in superstition. John says, no, it's so much better than that. Because I was a bystander, and what I saw with my eyes convinced me, and it's why I documented it for future generations, so that perhaps when you hear what I saw, you would believe, and having believed, you might receive and have life in his name. Next week, we're going to wrap up the series Bystander. I hope you won't miss the final episode, and I certainly hope you won't miss Easter. Let me pray for us, and we'll go. Father, thank you so much for this reminder. And Father, for every man or woman in here who has lost or is losing someone they love, I pray that they would be reminded they are not the first, and that Jesus and their Heavenly Father is so willing to enter into their pain. But that, Father, there is the promise of eternal life, and that even though we die, we live. Not because of faith, but because of Jesus. So, Father, wherever this lands with us, give us the courage to embrace it with all of our heart. In Jesus' name, amen.
At different points in our lives, we've all asked this question: how can a good God allow bad things to happen? Especially to good people. Maybe that is where you're at right now. And without a clear response, this dilemma can actually cause us to doubt the existence of God altogether. Often it causes us to lose faith. But when we look at the sign where Jesus raised his friend from the dead, this shows us that God not only exists in this world full of bad and evil things, but he actively chose to engage with it. Not just that, he actually chooses to engage with you, because he couldn't just leave this world and he couldn't just leave you to its own devices. So, we've seen these 6 signs up until now, and with this sign, it is so apparent that it was done for you, so that you could believe that Jesus isn't just a man, but that Jesus was exactly who he says he was. Next week we'll see and look at the sign that undoubtedly changed the world forever. It changed the course of history and has been changing the world ever since. Don't miss next week for Easter. We'll be here, same time, same place. Thanks so much for joining us, guys. See you next week.
Hi guys, we are so glad you decided to join us this morning. In this time of isolation, why not join the Waypoint community group on Facebook? Here the community will be posting what they're up to, some fun activities and important things coming up. This is the place for you to stay connected and hopefully be entertained. Note that all content will be screened, so don't worry about any spam or negative content. If you find yourself in need of prayer, any form of help, or even if you're available to assist those in need, please visit our website at www.waypoint.org.za and fill in a form applicable to you. Someone will be ready to assist you. If technology is not your friend, then please contact our helpline at 041-360-9742. Thank you for tuning in, for staying safe and keeping your distance. Even though you're in isolation, you are not alone. And remember, love is the way and God is the reason.